In this era of revelation and information, a time where, with a couple of keystrokes, the deepest regions of antiquity are both hidden and laid bare. I don't think there is a single teacher of history, a linguist, archaeologist, paleontologist, or biblical scholar worth his salt that would doubt the truth of a people called Israel historically. A people who seem to step on the scene out of the shadows of the great empire of Egypt. But in our lesson today, we will go on to prove through source material that the people of the biblical narrative are in fact not Israelites, but are usurpers of true Israelite history. This statement, while shocking, is nonetheless objectively true. It must be clearly stated, this info does not defame nor degrade Jews or Judaism, but explains the difference between the Jew and the Israelite. Now let's start clearing away years of misinformation and disinformation. The fact that ancient and modern Jews are described as pale-skinned Europeans, while the great leaders of the Israelites, Abraham and Moses, are described as large, copper-colored men with long, black, coarse hair who are fierce to look upon, is a very obvious contradiction. Or the simple fact that Shem, the ancestor of all Israelites, does not have a descendant named Sem, nor was there a tribe called Sem who would have to have produced this Semitic people speaking a Semitic language. While all facts points towards a racial, cultural, and ethnic appropriation, we deem color and race as low-level spiritual science, and it will be totally omitted from this documentary. The purpose of this information is not to defame or besmirch any group, but to highlight the vast differences between the two peoples. Yes, two separate people. The Jews, while a historically proven people, are erroneously conflated through religious dogma with the Israelites uncritically, even to this day. The people of the narrative, when it comes to nature, character, and deed, are 100% the opposite of the true Israelite. With the understanding that the Israelites were a morally and spiritually advanced people, we will now compare and contrast the biblical narrative with more modern revelations. Not to show superficial differences like ethnicity and skin color, but that the heritage, culture, and even language of the two peoples are completely different from each other. But without further ado, the Creator Gang Productions presents 10 ways to prove you're not an Israelite. Number 1. If you call yourself a Jew or the tribe of Judah or Judean, you are not an Israelite. One thing we always must remember is that men lie, women lie, and gods lie. But behavior, or what a thing does or produces, doesn't lie. In short, how a thing behaves or what it produces is proof of what it is. Many people groups have stolen the names and histories of other peoples over time, like the Marsh Arabs have done to the true Egyptian, or like the Gutians have usurped the true history of the ancient Sumerians. A quick search of the Sumerians brings up a long-nosed, bald-headed, pale-skinned people represented as Sumerians, which is in a stark contrast to how the goddess Inanna describes the Sumerians herself as her beloved, the black-headed people. But we must first ask a logical question. What is a Jew? From Webster's Dictionary, a Jew, referring to people of either the kingdom of Judea or the tribe of Judah, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. But there are three major problems with this flawed narrative that will now be exposed. One is that Israel is not composed of 12 tribes, only two. Two, neither one of those tribes are called Judah. Three, if the Israelites are scattered to the four winds, how could they ever be concentrated enough in one land to ever make a kingdom? Let's expose the truth with the book of Earth, Sky, and Spirit. The Oahspe Glossary states, Israelites. The beginning of the Israelites was the combining of two peoples, not 12. The Iz and the Zerl tribes, not Judah, which were organized by Abraham. The Faithists moved into what would become Egypt. So they were there before it was called Egypt or Kemet, and were called Israelites. Moses led them out of Egypt and they settled in northern Africa. And they called their new land Israel. Now, this verse debunks prior claims made by religious dogmatics and AI revisionists. Now, let's further expose the difference with Oahspe, which is a primary source for this information, proving definitively that if you call yourself a Jew or you claim that you are from the tribe of Judah, you are not an Israelite. Book of Saphah. The Israelites proper were a small minority and scattered in many lands. The rest, the rest who were called Jews lived under written laws and ceremonies, which were compiled by and established by Ezra in Jerusalem, which combination of books is called the Bible and was completed in the year 496 BC. Now, this is astounding objective primary proof that by deed, character, and culture, the Jew is 100% the opposite of the Israelite. This absolutely clears up all falsehood. There are two different people, one called a Jew and one called an Israelite. Pay very close attention and take clear notice. The Jew has been conflated as an Israelite since the invention of the biblical narrative. But how? When the true Israelites were never at any time in history called Jews. Now let that sink in a second. But with the higher light of the Creator now being revealed in the era of Cosmon, we will now be able to unravel many spiritual and man-made mysteries, giving the statement, all shall be revealed, an even grander connotation. Number 2, if you were part of a kingdom and or followed a king, Solomon, David, Saul, etc., you're not an Israelite. With the understanding that the true Israelite was never in a kingdom, nor did they ever follow any kings, or in a sense say, better yet, a king than the Most High. The question must now be asked, well, Who are the people in the kingdoms who are claiming to be Israelites? But in the book of Safa, found in the OASP, we find a more cohesive narrative than those offered up by Bible and Talmudic text. The book of Safa, in the year 1421 BC, the Israelites began to marry with the Canaanites, who were under the control of Baal. Ashtaroth, whose dominions extended jointly with Baal over western and southern Africa, sent spirit emissaries to the handsomest of the women of Canaan, and by impression led them into the camps of the Israelites to tempt the young men. For the heathen gods decided to use these means, or genetic admixture, to destroy the worshipers of the great unseen. And many of the Israelitish young men were tempted by the beauty of the heathen women, and thus took them for wives. And these wives brought with them their own familial spirits, who were slaves to Baal and Ashtaroth. The Archibald immediately sent Jerub, an Etherian angel, into the Israelites' camp, giving him 2,000 inspiring spirits to counteract the labors of Baal and Ashtaroth. Nevertheless, it so happened when the half-breed children were grown up, having Canaan mothers, they began to murmur against the peace policy of the Israelites, saying, "As the other people have kings and emperors, why not here? As other people raise up soldiers and declare war and go forth, possessing lands and cattle, why do we not do so?" But in the 397th year, or 1156 BC, the gods Baal and Ashtaroth triumphed through their familial spirits and caused the Jews to anoint a king to rule over them. This king was called Saul, signifying of the Lord God. Prior to this, the Israelites acknowledged no God or Lord, but covenanted with the Great Spirit Yehovah. The name had been kept secret with the fathers, and the commandments were announced from the Great Spirit I Am. The familial spirits now inspired Saul to change the words of the commandments to the Lord your God, as a conciliatory stratagem to please the nations and tribes of people who worship Baal, Dagon, Ashtaroth, Hagak, and other gods and lords of the lower heavens. In that way, the Lord God, or land God, was substituted for Yahweh, secretly called Eoah. And as prior to this, the Great Spirit had been taught to Israelites as an unconceivable entity, whose form and extent no man could attain to know, so was he now transformed into and declared to be in the shape and form of man, and having a residence in the firmament of heaven. Thus they made the Great Spirit merely an idol, and so they began the overthrow of the holy doctrines of Moses. After this, the Israelites were two peoples, those of the king, the Jews, and those of the Creator, the Essenes, the Nazarenes, the Israelites, and of the prophets. And this placed the Israelites at a disadvantage before the neighboring tribes and nations, having sacrificed the name of the Great Spirit and made him into a man figure. The heathen said, "What better is their Lord and God than our Lord or God?" And they made war against the Israelites on all sides. And the latter, the Jews, the king's people, having stooped to a corporeal king, having stooped to David and Saul, Solomon went further and raised soldiers and went to war. And in the 409th year, after the departure out of Egypt, or in the year 1144 BC, the entire peace policy and non-resistance of the Mosaical inspiration was overthrown. And the king's people, became warriors and even warred against one another, revealing that the northern and southern kingdoms were of the admixed king's people, not those of the Israelites, whose angels removed them entirely from the kingdoms, who only followed the Creator and the prophets. That is a clear delineation. Two different people who are doing two different things. There is no sidestepping this info. If your claim is that your ancestors were part of the kingdom of Israel or the kingdom of Judah, we have now proved within a shadow of a doubt that those people were not Israelites in fact. Which leads us to the number 3 way to prove you're not an Israelite, which is diet. If you ate meat or if you sacrificed animals to a deity, you are not an Israelite. The Creator says, "Behold, the 7th era has begun." Your Creator commands you to change from a carnivorous man of contention to a herbivorous man of peace. Plus, the fact that Israel produces its own prophets is proof that they would have practiced the dietary laws of the prophets, as revealed in the book of Safah, chapter K. The secret ceremonies commanded vegetable diet for the fathers of the rabbis, prophets, seers, and winonas, or trance subjects, and many of Koitas, the Egyptian priestesses, people followed their examples. This is a key point to the overall theme, that every description of an Israelite in the Bible are actually cultural depictions of the Jew, not an Israelite, whose culture is completely opposite. The fact is, Israelites were always vegetarians. Creator tells Israelites to never eat anything that ever breathed the breath of life. Can we say the same of the Jew? No. As a matter of fact, they have a whole system of murdering animals called kosher, active to this very day. With the confusing nature of the biblical God, which tells you don't kill animals and that the herbs and the fruits will be your meats, and then contradicts itself by saying you can kill and eat split-toed animals and also sacrifice them, and then turns around again and says he never told you to sacrifice the animals in the first place. Clearly, the biblical narrative itself is its own major source for the cognitive dissonance where the biblical diet is concerned. But the proof that the dietary law within the Bible is that of the Jew and not of the Israelite is the fact that during certain times of oppression, to differentiate the praiser of the Great Spirit from the rest of the people because of their physical resemblance, the emperor was forced to prove who was an Israelite by their diet. Here's further light. Owaspi's first book of God has shown, and this of the laws of Han, great persecution came upon the faithless, the Israelites, the worshippers of light. Han said, Try them by the food they eat. And whoever refuses to eat fish or flesh shall suffer death. And the favor of the courts shall be denied to any man or woman who holds sacred the life of a cow, a horse, a dog, or any other animal on the face of the earth, or in the waters, or in the air above the earth. This is the complete and total antithesis of the biblical Jew, who still kills and eats animals today. Which brings us to the fourth way to prove you're not an Israelite, which is, if you ever went to war, you're not an Israelite. Biblical God makes assertions like he is not the author of confusion, but goes on to give contradictory and confusing commands. For instance, thou shalt not kill is easily understood, even to a child. But the confusing God later tells you in Samuel 15:3 to kill children and infants. Very confusing, correct? But what's not confusing is that the people described in the Bible are a unscrupulous, warlike people, and that proves you're not an Israelite. Remember, the key is the people of the Bible and the true Israelites are opposites. In short, everything the people of the narrative does, the Israelite does the opposite. The biblical Jew warred so much, their wars are hard to keep up with. But let's just name a few of the Jewish wars. How about the Battle of Ai, or the Battle of Mount Tabor, Gideon's campaign, the Benjamite War, the Battle of Mizpah, the Battle of Michmash, and the Battle of the Woods of Ephraim, just to name a few. Objectively, the biblical people are a warlike people, but the key to unlock this mystery is the Israelites were never warriors, nor went to war at all. The facts are the Creator is against war, and so are his people. The Creator states in the book of Judgment, chapter 32, judgment is rendered against every nation and all people in the world who carry on war or who are accessory to war, in which any man or woman created alive by Yahweh is slain in defense of any king or ruler or in defense of any country or any government in the world. But there's even more light. The book of Ezra, chapter 47 says, God said, so that man may know this is true, behold, the followers of the Creator are not warriors, nor have they ever been. The Creator said, this mark I put upon man from the time of Cain to the present day, that whoever raises his hand against his brother raises his hand against me also. And this mark shall distinguish my servants to the end of the world. Now, in the spiritual world, that level of revelation is called a megaton light bomb. Because pay close attention. By the nature, character, and deed, we were able to prove that if you ever participated in war, you're not an Israelite. But it is key to note, we are not anti-Semitic, nor are we attempting to bash anyone's culture. Just the opposite. We're here to prove by the nature, through character and deed, that the Israelite and the people of the narrative are two total separate people. Further proof is, ask yourself, are the Israelites at war today? Now ask yourself, are the Jews at war today? It's just more objective truth that can't be denied. Number 5. The fifth way to prove that you're not an Israelite is that if you're following the Levitical doctrine, aka the written laws and ceremonies found in the biblical text, you're not an Israelite. 2 points will now be made abundantly clear. 1, the true Israelites never had a written law or doctrine. And 2, the true Israelites were never Leviticans. Per the timetables of prophecy, the time of Moses in the Exodus begins 1553 BC, while the Bible, or Tanakh, was compiled in 496 BC in Babylon by Ezra. That is over 1,000 years apart. Now, ask yourself, how could we be following a law written in the time of Moses when in the time of Ezra, Ezra admits that in his time, the written law had been burned? 2nd Ezra 14 and 21. For the law is burnt. Therefore no man knoweth the things that are done of thee, or of the works that shall begin. King James Version. And per Owaspi, no written laws had existed for over 400 years prior to the life of Ezra and his invention of the biblical narrative. Book of Saphah, K58. Now, from the time of Moses to Ezra, there was an interval of over 400 years in which the Jews had no written record. So from roughly 900 BC down to 496 BC, there was no written record. The age of the Ezra Bible, the Common Bible, is not, therefore, from the time of Moses, but from the time of Ezra, over 1,100 years later. But the major question still lingers. What is a Levitican? If you ask that question to any Christian apologist or biblical scholar, they'll come with the common answer that these are the sons of Aaron created to be priests for the Israelite people. But there are major flaws in that narrative. 1, that the Israelites didn't have a written law, only an oral law. 2, any Israelite, man, woman, or child, born by birthright, can enter into the holies of holies. And 3, for the fact that any Israelite could have entered the Holy of Holies, they would have never needed a priest to intercede for them. Now let's clear up these major contradictions with the book of Earth, Sky, and Spirit, letting you know that if you follow the written laws of the Levitical doctrine, you're not an Israelite. Think about it. Why would an Israelite who have been Israelites for thousands of years, even during oppression, now need a book? Why would they now need a book or laws and commandments to teach them how to be Israelites? Let's clear it up. Who and what a Levitican is once and for all. The Ark of Bond, 20 and 13. And in not many days, Moses wrote the Levitican laws. Why? For the inner temple of Jehovah was in spoken words only. But the outer temple was written so that it was said, the Hebrews have two laws, one which no other man knows, and one for those who are not eligible by faith. Pay attention. Being those who are called Leviticans. But not Leviticans in fact, but hangers on, who had followed the Israelites out of Egypt and who for the most part had no God, little judgment, and no learning. So what we have learned so far is a Levitican is any non-Israelite who followed Israel out of Egypt. 2, a Levitican is a person not eligible to enter the inner sanctum. 3, a Levitican is a people who were godless, of little judgment, and no learning. But most importantly, we've proven a Levitican is a non-Israelite. And if you follow the Levitican doctrine, you're not an Israelite either. Does not the old adage say, the law is for the lawless? Well, the next logical question at this point should be, if the true Israelites only had oral commandments, if the true Israelites only had oral commandments, why did Moses write laws for these Levitical people? Why? Because Moses, your supposed forefather, didn't trust the Leviticans as far as he could throw them. Book of Safar, E and 23. Moses, being about to give up his soul, said, I feel a thorn pricking in my side, and I know it is the Leviticans. They, the Leviticans, not being eligible to the secret rites or the inner sanctum, also known as Elohim, will in time come to possess the country and substitute their Lord and God for the great I am, the All Eloah. You see? You see it now? Owaspy is clearing things up. Levitican literally means wannabe, a hanger-on. They have Levitical priests because these Jews, these Leviticans, these hangers-on, these wannabes are not eligible to the inner sanctums. Why? Because they're not truly Israelites. Now that we've exposed the falsity of the Levitical priesthood, let's go on to expose the people who the Levitical priesthood consists of, which leads us to the number 6 way to prove you're not an Israelite. And that is, if you believe that the Cohen genetic proves your Israelite heritage, then think again. It only proves you're not an Israelite. Let's put things on a timeline. With Hebrew having been proven to be over 1,000 years younger than the Aramaic of the Israelites, but more importantly, it is over 2,500 years younger than the Ge'ez language of Egypt. My question is then, how can any Kohen, which is the Egyptian word for priest, be of Israelite stock when Israel didn't even have a word for priest? Hinting at what we've already proven, that the Levitical priesthood, and hence the whole entire tribe of Levi, is a Jewish biblical invention and not of the Creator. Ask yourself, if Israel already had priests, wouldn't they already have a word for priest? Ask yourself, why did they need to borrow the word from Egypt? The answer is because the Levitical priesthood is sourced from Egypt and predates the Exodus and the later Levitical law. But before proceeding further, let us define some important terms and explore some key concepts, like a loan word. A loan word may be defined as a word that has been borrowed from another language, the donor language, and made part of the vocabulary of another language, the recipient language. Words can be borrowed for a number of reasons, most often due to the necessity, or i.e., lack of a native term for a particular item. So, let's clear it all up. What is a Kohen? In Ge'ez, the word for priest is Kohen, pronounced Kain. Origin: the word directly translates to priest and is derived from the ancient Egyptian root Kain, which is related to the concept of priesthood in various languages within the region and is a direct loan word from Egypt to the Semitic Hebrew language. If they already had priests, why don't they have a word for it? Let that sink in. We've already exposed who and what a Levitican is. We've also gone to show that at least 400,000 non-Israelites called Leviticans left with Israel out of Egypt. Now, let's go on to show that many of those godless people of little learning and no knowledge were Kohenes, or its female equivalent, a Kohetha, not a true Israelite. Book of Safar, K-16. And in those days it so happened that one Kohetha, the priestess, an Egyptian woman, a Suez, went into the lodge at noon, no person being in the lodge except herself. Now, while she was examining the remnants of the showbread and the basins and the candlestick, a voice spoke to her, saying, "Do not touch these, for they are sacred." And again, the voice spoke, saying, "Say to Moses, the I Am says, and Moses will wonder at your speech. Behold, these implements are sacred. Hide them by day. For those who have spirit perception, perceiving them, will obtain the signs and passwords." But the secret ceremonies commanded vegetable diets for the fathers, the rabbis, the prophets, the seers, the trance subjects, and many of Kohetha's people, the Egyptians, followed their example, proving once and for all that those of the Kohetha genetic are not only not Israelites, but they are the godless, heathenistic, barbaric reject descendants of Israel's number one enemy, the Egyptian. So, those of the Kohen genetic that go on to produce the 12 tribes, and hence the Jews, are of Egyptian Canaanite stock, not of the Shemitic Israelite stock. Let that sink in a second. Number 7. The seventh way to prove you're not an Israelite is if you use the Hebrew language as proof of your Israelite heritage, you're not an Israelite. First, the objective proves neither Abraham, Moses, nor Yeshua spoke Hebrew. Abram, the Persian Shemitic prophet of the Israelites, spoke Ahamic, the language of the oracles, misnomered today as cuneiform. Moses, Another great prophet of the Israelites, raised in the house of Pharaoh during the Middle Kingdom, spoke Ge'ez, Ebba, the Egyptian Phoenician, and the Samaris, theorized in many circles as the original Proto-Indo-European language. And finally, Yeshua and his entire family spoke the Aramaic language, not Hebrew. And the same would apply to all true Israelites. Remember, we've already revealed that there are two separate people. Now let's go on further and prove that they spoke two different languages. While being touted as related or quote-unquote sister languages, the fact are Aramaic and Hebrew are not the same language. The facts are Aramaic predates Hebrew by 1,000 years. The only reason linguists attempt to claim that they are sister languages is simply because they evolved in the same region. And while that may be so, it does not excuse the objective fact that the speaker of Hebrew and the speaker of Aramaic were unintelligible to each other. That's correct. The speaker of Aramaic and the speaker of Hebrew couldn't understand each other. Here's an example. Modern English and Dutch are said to be sister languages, and yet the speakers of modern English and Dutch cannot understand each other. The key is always to remember the Israelite did everything opposite of the biblical narrative. So, if the narrative is that the Jews were enslaved in Babylon, then the Israelites weren't. And that is exactly where these Jews learned Hebrew, the language of the Gentile. As witnessed by the writings of Daniel, a eunuch forced to learn the language of the Babylonians, and Ezra, later compiling the Tanakh written totally in Hebrew. And yes, both were slaves in Babylon. An interesting tidbit we've gleaned is that during the 1st century BC and CE, we find Yeshua and the Israelites, who were at this time being called Essenes and Nazarenes, holy speakers of the Aramaic tongue, while oddly, the great Jewish scribes such as Josephus and Paul are producing their greatest works in Greek and Latin. But astoundingly, the true historicity reveals it is the so-called Edomite, the divinely hated sons of Esau from the land commonly misnomered as Turkey, that we find the true writers and speakers of Samaritan Hebrew and in the 1st century BC and CE. See, we now know for a fact it was the Gentile nations like Babylon and Turkey who spoke and writ in Hebrew. But don't take my word for it. Why not let the greatest of the so-called sons of Edom speak for himself? From the book of Antiquity of Veiled, the 1st century great Cappadocian sage Apollonius of Tyana reveals that, quote, one Hegesippus made copies from the translations and modified versions of the originals in the Samaritan tongue, and Ophilas copied from the manuscripts of Hegesippus. Here's the key. I, Apollonius, wrote in the Hebraic Samaritan tongue, which was the language of my country. Cappadocia is in modern Turkey, aka the land of Edom. Now, ask yourself, why in the 1st century, at the same time the Jews are purportedly writing the Gospels, is Esau speaking and writing in Hebrew, but Jacob isn't? But an even better answer is revealed in the question itself, and that is that logic dictates that the sons of Esau are still speaking the Hebrew language today. Now let that sink in for a second. Number 8. The number 8 way to prove you're not an Israelite is if you walked around a desert for 40 years, you're not an Israelite. With creators highlight outshining all man-made doctrines and beliefs, archaeologists, paleontologists, and biblical historians are forced to admit that 1, Egypt doesn't even have an agreed upon chronology. 2, their inability to put Moses on a proper timeline. And 3, also their ineptitude when attempting to identify Moses in Egypt historically. Question: why should we believe the narrative when we've shown that true Israel are the opposite of the subjective narratives of Bible? The proof that the people of the biblical narrative aren't Israelites and that the Exodus didn't take 40 years is, firstly, Exodus started on the 10th day of April, or Abib, 1553 BC, and only lasted 4 years, 207 days exactly, not 40 years. From April 10th, 1553 BC to November 3rd, 1549 BC. That is the extent of Exodus. Also, the true Israelites had a pillar of cloud that shines on them in the day and a pillar of fire that followed the people the whole time they were in Exodus. So, per the biblical narrative, where is this pillar of fire at Mount Sinai? Where was this pillar of fire when the golden calf was created? Where was it when they scouted the land of the Rephaim? Ask yourself, wouldn't it be kind of hard to sneak up on a people when you have a fire tornado following you? Biblical God claims to start this miracle, and yet even this supposedly all-knowing God can't tell us when it stopped. Ask yourself, why is there no people in the Middle East claiming to have seen this great supernatural feat historically or otherwise? Let's end this 40 years in the desert fallacy and show that if the people of the biblical narrative were true Israelites, the people around them would have seen the light and fire cloud following them around and written about it. The Ark of Bond, 18 and 29. Now, from the place of Succoth to the other side of the sea, a pillar of cloud preceded the Israelites by day, and a pillar of fire stood over them by night. And the people looked, and everyone saw the cloud and the light. And the name of the place they reached when they crossed over was Shechomareth, and they camped there many days. From the time of Moses began to prepare for the migration of Israel until he reached Shechomareth was 4 years, 207 days. And the number of Israelites who went forth out of Egypt was 3,750,000 men, women, and children. And the number of other people who accompanied them was 400,000. And because they were of the uncircumcised tribes of the ancients, the Hebrews named them Levites, i.e., people of imperfect flesh. But let's go a little further and explain the discrepancy in the lifespan of Moses. Firstly, we must understand that the biblical writings are not the writings of the Israelites. Jeremiah 8:8 says lying scribes wrote the Bible. What's not commonly known is that those lying scribes were Egyptian, not Israelites at all, but their enemies. The adept lessons teach that the Egyptian calendar gives 2 years for every 12-month cycle. So every 1 year with the Hebrews was 2 years with the Egyptians. So, in the stories written about Moses, at the time he left Egypt, the Egyptian narrative gives him an age of 80 years, which is also a hint as into where Ezra got the story from, while later scribes gave the date as 40 years. So, to fix this contradiction of time, they applied the Egyptian account to the Hebrew account and then added the numbers together, exposing why 120 years was given for Moses' age per the biblical narrative, when in fact Moses was 40 years old when he left in both narratives. It's just that the Egyptian count gives it 80 because of the 2 years in one. So they conflated and wrote the lie. So to cover up the contradiction in the biblical the biblical writers created a story that Moses ran away from a murder charge and went to Midian for 40 years. This information serves a double purpose, not only proving that you're not an Israelite, but also exonerating the great forefather Moses, Arkaban 15 and 33. And in order to stigmatize Moses, they said he fled from Pharaoh's palace because he seen two men, an Egyptian and an Israelite, fighting, and that Moses slew the Egyptian and buried him in the sand. And the recorders thus entered the report into the recorder's house. See, the lie of Moses' murder has now finally been exposed. Here's a little faith as FYI. If you don't know what, when, where, or why the light was falling on the Israelites, or from where the light was sourced, then it's just another objective proof as to why you're not an Israelite. Book of Saphah, K18. The woman Koetha did as commanded, and Moses commanded the workmen to make a tabernacle, a model or image of a place of worship, or a movable or portable temple. And the sacred implements were kept within this tabernacle. And this was the corporeal base of the Ark of Bond, misunderstood today as the Ark of the Covenant, which is a locality in the Etherian heaven by which the light of the second heaven reached the earth to Moses and his people in a pillar of cloud by day and of light by night. So you were walking in a desert for 40 years and no one historically reports seeing a large fire tornado falling on 3.7 million people for 40 years. Also, if your God doesn't know the what, where, or when of his own event, not only is your God false, but you're not an Israelite. The number 9 way to prove you're not an Israelite. If you or your people purportedly went north or east out of Egypt during Exodus, you're not an Israelite. If you claim that you're an Israelite because of where Israel is placed on a modern map, you're definitely not an Israelite. Let me ask you a very simple question. How can you be a true Israelite in the Middle East when the true Israelite went west out of Egypt? Let's make this one short and sweet. For context, the angelic beings are speaking about Moses before he is born in this chapter. From Owaspi, Book of Leka 4 and 12. And Moses shall deliver the Israelites out of Egypt. And you shall also put this upon Moses and his people, that he shall lead his people westward. And their heirs after them shall also go westward. Yes, westward, until they circumscribe the earth. 3,400 years you shall allot to them to complete this journey. And when they have carried my name to the west coast of North America and established me, behold, I will bring the earth into Cosmon. That's a prophecy. If that's a prophecy, let's see if it can be proved. Question: was there historically proven mass migration to the West Coast in 1848, 1849 AD at the beginning of the Cosmon era? Was there a historically proven mass migration to the West Coast in 1848, 1849 at the beginning of the Cosmon era? Has anyone ever heard of the 49ers? Question: if Moses and the real Israelites are in the West and Northwest Africa region, who are the people in the East claiming to be Israelites? Let that sink in a second. If you claim the heritage of the people in the land called Israel or Palestine today, just face it, you're not an Israelite. Last but not least, the number 10 way and simplest way to prove you're not an Israelite is if you ever praise the God or Lord in lieu of the Creator, you're not an Israelite. Let's make this extremely clear. The true Israelites never worship the God of any kind, ever, nor any deity called Lord or Lord God. But the people of the biblical narrative did, and they still do. See? Again, 100% the opposite of what the Israelite culture and nature is. It's been revealed that while in Egypt, the Commission gave as one of the major reasons for their oppression of the Israelite people was their refusal to praise the Egyptian deities. True Israel were and have always been followers of the Great Spirit. No gods or lords or saviors of any kind as revealed in the book of OSB 1 and 18. Neither shall you have any God, Lord, or Savior, but only your Creator, Yahweh, and you shall worship none other from this time forward forever. I am sufficient for my own creation. Creator not only tells Israel to not praise any God, but Creator explains the major reason as to why no man should ever praise a God. And that is because Creator reveals that He literally created man to work his way up to God's status. Book of Inspiration 8:6. Nevertheless, I created man with the capacity to comprehend this also. For so I designed him from the start to work his way up to the Godhead, understanding all below him. But there's still an unavoidable fact that the true Israelite, Essene, Nazarene, would have been taught the difference between a God and the Creator from infancy, revealing that it is literally the key point in all Israelite culture to never praise anything called God or Lord. While the people of the narrative have served many gods. Let that sink in. See, true Israel always knew that one, God and the Creator are not the same thing. In fact, Creator is the God maker. 2, God is a one-time living, breathing man, no different than you are today. And 3, that in time we all turn to gods and goddesses, and hence God, a man, is a thing that shouldn't be praised, as revealed in the Book of Discipline, which is, by the way, the only book in the world where the who, what, when, where, and why of true God is explained. Book of Discipline 1 and 2. Hear the words of your God, O man. I am your brother, risen from mortality to a holy place in heaven. Prophet in my wisdom, and be admonished by my love. For as I am your elder brother, so shall it be with you. To rise also in time to come, and to look back to mortals, and call them to the exalted heavens of the Almighty. To Yahweh, to the Creator, all adoration and glory forever. Amen. For he is within all, beyond, and over all. Now, pay close attention. True God is praising something greater than himself. There is no place in the entire biblical narrative where the narcissistic, angry, and jealous God of the Bible has ever humbled himself. Nor does this God of the Bible have the intelligence nor spiritual fortitude to overcome its low, murderous, barbaric, heathenistic, and pederastic inclinations. But further study in the Book of Discipline reveals 1 and 14. Hear your God, O man, and distinguish then that the two, God and the Creator, are not the same one. But here is the kicker. Nor is your God more than what you shall be in time to come. And therefore, I am like any other spirit of the dead, a one-time man upon earth, even as you are in this day, but one within the organic heavens of the earth. This simple understanding that God is nothing to be praised would have been and still is axiomatic and foundational in the lives of all true Israelites. But for some reason, it seems those of the biblical narrative must have not got the message, because they are objectively doing exactly the opposite by praising a God, God, or Lord in the form and figure of a man sitting on a throne in heaven. Owaspi further reveals that if your God has ever asked for prayer, or if your God has ever been seen by anyone, it is proof of the falsity of your personal deity. Be real with yourself. Do you suffer from religious indoctrination also? Owaspi gives a quick way to prove to yourselves if you suffer from religious dogmas and ideologies by answering 2 simple questions. Right? From the book of Safa, Imhak, or the golden adept chamber, the wise man asks, what is an idol? The initiate answers, anything having form and figure that is worshipped. The wise man asks, who is God? The initiate answers, a spirit in heaven, or a spirit with a heavenly throne, believed by people in darkness to be the very creator of all things. Now, let's see if you also were a victim of the religious God spell. Be real with yourself. Did you ever think man was made in the image of God? Did you ever call the Creator God? Did you ever believe the Creator was in the shape of a man? Did you ever believe the Creator sat on a throne? Did you ever believe the Creator had a residence in heaven where he judged man? Well, if you said yes to any one of these questions, you've admitted to yourself that you're a victim of the religious God spell. But I'm also here to tell you it's not your fault. But more importantly, you've also admitted you're not an Israelite. And with that, we've come to the end of the 10 ways to prove you're not an Israelite. This documentary was not created to bring strife between people who are both claiming to love the Creator, but to bring a new and higher light in hopes of making opportunities for conversation. Also, to bring things hidden in the dark to the light, with the understanding that man-made dogma has pervaded religious ideology. All texts must now be scrutinized and reevaluated. And what better time than now? For all questions and inquiries, I can be reached at cosmoncaltv@gmail.com. That's cosmoncaltv@gmail.com. And with that, I'm going to leave you in the same way I found you, in love, light, and balance. Peace.